presentation portion of it.
So Sashi, for today's review, can you say it's a cover from first
3 chapters?
First 3 chapters. So basically, we can say today's review is covering chapter 1 to 3.
Yes, and the focus here is not so much understanding the solution, but understanding how we get
Is Sashi freeze?
Yeah, he's frozen.
Oh, he's frozen.
Oh, you can't hear me?
You frozen for a few seconds, so that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, you probably need to repeat the last 30 seconds. What do you say?
Okay, one second. Okay. Okay, so I wonder if it is the heat that kind of freezes things. I'm literally sitting near my Wi-Fi router, but hopefully it doesn't happen here. So let's just get into it, right? So I think the idea is that we try to understand dejection that Arjuna feels and why that becomes a critical point for him to go further. So I think the only person from the last week's session here is Jason, I guess, right? So if you remember last week, we started looking into J. Krishnamurti, who, to me, much like how during the Bhakti Yoga, chapter 6 through 12, we talked a lot about Meera, right? So Meera represents very characteristically what does devotion mean. To me, at least, like there are many other saints like that, but we just picked one of them. And as we go into the latter 6 chapters, last 6 chapters, Krishnamurti comes to mind, which his focus primarily is no rituals, no philosophies, nothing. You already know what you want, and this is how you go about it, right? So he's a very straightforward thinker, straightforward approach. And we will try to draw a sort of a similarity between what Krishna tries to tell, but then how Arjuna resists that, and then why there is this whole ritualistic or step-by-step approach that becomes important for us. So one of the things that we saw in chapter 14 was that, he said, J. Krishnamurti says that anytime you have a problem, or an issue that you're trying to face, you want to be there, or you're having a conversation with somebody or anything that you're doing, right? Don't bring up your past memories into that space. So that helps you to be there now, where you're giving complete attention to that specific thing. And that itself is sort of meditative, because you're trying to not bias your discussion based on whatever the past memories are telling you about this person, be it, or the situation or whatnot, right? So it becomes a very, you're completely attentive to that thing. And that itself is enough for you to find a resolution that is going to work for everybody, and you come out of that situation, right? But to get there, one of the things he also talks about is, we got to cleanse the content of our consciousness. So our consciousness tends to be filled with anger towards somebody, attraction towards somebody, or whatnot, right? Jealousy and all of that stuff, right? So that is our particular nature, depending on who you're feeling, who you're working with, what political party you belong to, all of that stuff, right? So we need to, obviously, J. Krishnamurti says that can happen just like this. You just have to start on it, right? So he's very instantaneous kind of guy. But he also says that the caveat is that this is a very difficult thing. So you have to consciously do it every time. Now, I think Krishna is also saying the same thing in Gita. So the trajectory for this is dejection. Means what happens is we are feeling dejection and crisis all the freaking time, right? Throughout our life. So that becomes a jumping point, right? For us to go into a conversation about like, who am I and all of that stuff, right? And we can start questioning not the other who has caused this trouble for us, but what is in it, what is there in me that is making me see this, right? And what is the real cause for dejection? Do I have control over it? I definitely can't control them. How can I control myself, right? So then he talks about the three, big sections, which is the karma yoga, which is the selfless action, devotion, bhakti yoga, and knowledge, right? And this is sort of similar to what Krishnamurti is talking about. So anyway, so that was supposed to be a sort of a continuity of our lecture series, from 14, we are here now. So we are sort of going back to chapter 1 and try to understand all of this stuff in that context. So Gita, every chapter does seem to stand alone, complete in itself. Like if you read just one chapter by itself, it does have a lot of information for you to gather and do something with it. There are in all 18 chapters, but these 18 chapters, if you continuously read it, there's a certain level of a continuity that happens. Also, Jeannie wants to join, looks like.
Yeah, I will take care of that.
Okay.
Yeah, Sashi, you want to maximize your
Maximize this. Okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so there are in all 18 chapters, and you guys see this also, right? Here. Yeah, so let me. Okay. Again, I would highly recommend that, try to avoid looking at the slides. In fact, today's presentation, what I wanted to do was only show slides when it was necessary. But some of you have said that that is not a good thing. Because I think what happens is there's a lot of words here and we get lost in words. And in fact, that's the point here, which is the words and labels are limitations. And we are trying to look at infinity, right? So if you are okay, can we just try this? And then I'll put the share again in a moment. Okay. Let me pop up my content here. So, okay. Every chapter is standalone, as I said, right? So now there is one way to look at an object, right? So we are looking at an object, like the Eknath Ishwaran's book that was being shown just a moment ago by Jason. Yeah, so that is a book. That is not Jason, right? So Jason is looking at the object. So Jason can say, I understand this book or see this object. So it's a little bit of a distance, right? So it is what some of the Swamis would call it as anatman, meaning you're not close to yourself. And anything that you can say, I see this, that you can point to is not you. So all of that, anything that is leading you out there is considered as ignorance. Everything that you are working out there needs to lead back to yourself. And that is the other way to look at this is when you're looking into a mirror. So when you're looking into the mirror, you're looking at yourself, looking in, right? And seeing at an object is the object is outside you. Looking in is you're looking in and you're looking at yourself, right? So one of the things about seeing at an object, what happens is that you start either loving the object or hating the object. And now what happens is, because it is outside, that love and hate is kind of similar, and it leads to attachment. Love will lead to attachment. You want more things out of it and all that stuff, right? But when you're looking at something which is, trying to understand how it is impacting me, it sort of becomes a love, like pure love, in the sense that, oh, I get this. This is impacting me, my life right now, right? And so the whole Gita is based around attachment, right? So it's the attachment and desires that are the problem. So one of the things that we can talk a little bit about. There are So what happens up to these levels of, like if you look at the 7 chakras of yoga, right? So there is the Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, right? So here what is happening is, when you're going from bottom to up, there are different, much like Maslow's triangle of needs and all that stuff, right? So here what is happening is, the Muladhara basically means that our body is relaxed. So we don't have any desires or needs for our body. So we are comfortable, much like how we are here today. You guys have, maybe there's a pain, but you can live through it and you're here. Then there is the internal desires, that is called as a Swadhisthana. So there also, your desires for your senses, maybe you need food, maybe you're smelling something, or you're seeing something interesting and all of that stuff, right? So all of that requirement for you to eat, or requirement for you to see, or requirement for you to listen to something, all of those desires are also sort of relaxed, right? And then the next level is the Manipura, where you want to continuously, there's almost like a greed, like, so you want more of something, more of this, more of that, right? So that is also relaxed. So what happens is, many a times when we are working at these bottom levels, sometimes we get stuck in these bottom levels. So it is really, you cannot really relax the body's needs, or relax the senses needs, and relax the mind's needs. So what happens is, you're stuck in this bottom cycle, and it leads to more desire and more unhappiness, in a way, in the sense that when it is the body's desires, or eye's desire, or mind's desire, you're always thinking of, hey, it's out there. And so we are always, ultimately the goal is, I want to be happy forever, right? Infinite bliss, if you will. But what happens is, when you're at the bottom 3 here, you're always collecting finite things. Maybe I get more money, or a bigger house, or a better wife, or a husband. That is going to give me this happiness. But as we all know, we all have some kind of a suffering that is related to some of our attachments. So this doing and trying to get something from outside to satisfy your needs is what we saw last time in 14th chapter, was Rajasa, right? So it's a doership. Like, I want to do this. I want to get this. I want to get this. So we are all in that state, in a way, right? And these desires from the bottom 3 that we talked about, body, senses, and mind, are never ending. The sorrow and the suffering then is also never ending, is what Krishna is going to try to explain to us. And the next level right above, when your body's needs are gone, your inner desires are gone, the senses desires are gone, and your mind has calmed down, you come to what is the Anahat Chakra. Anahat Chakra is where now something has happened in your life, or first of all, you can't choose to be there. So something happens in your life that brings you to a point where, no matter what you do with regards to, like, so much money you collect and number of cars you have, is not going to solve that problem. So there is a very critical issue, existential crisis, identity crisis has come in your life. And no matter how much your senses satisfaction you're going to get, that's not going to help. mind desires, trying to do a lot of charity and all of that stuff, that's not going to help either, because the question comes down to, as much as, could be like, what does it mean for me to be a husband? Maybe there's a divorce going on. Suddenly there's a big rupture in your thread of life, right? Or in this case, in Arjuna's case, we will talk about the story in a moment, is that something critical happens where he becomes so aware of, like, what does it mean to be a brother? What does it mean to be a warrior? Why am I fighting this war? And you come to a point where suddenly all of your past, all of your things that you have done up to this point become very, very sort of like have no meaning whatsoever. So you wonder, like, hey man, I was a dad for such a long time, and somehow something happened with your kids and all that stuff, and you start questioning, what does it even mean to be a father? Or so all of that, right? So suddenly the past has stopped. So remember what earlier we talked about what Krishnamurti was saying, that when you are looking at an issue, you want to turn off all your past. So when dejection happens or a crisis comes at you, it's sort of an external mechanism that has come to you, which has caused you to continue, caused you to sort of doubt your memories, all of your past. You suddenly are at that moment because life has brought you there, right? And that is the purest moment in a way, where you can either jump upwards or go much down deeper in depression, right? So dejection has a quality of being either a disease, a crisis moment can be a disease, or it can be an opportunity for growth. Um, um, and, you know, so remember we talked about Rajasa, at least in the last lecture. The other two states are Sattva and the tamasa, which is at the bottom. So so rajasa means I want to do something, right? And sattva is now not about me, but the whole world, right? So they are a little more oriented towards the nice, better things, or ethical things and moral things and all of that stuff, right? And tamasa is where you're stuck in life, like like politician gets stuck with the the presidentship that they want to hold on to, right? That's the state that you get down to. So when the crisis situation comes, the pathway can lead you down, and you become overprotective of what you have, and then that becomes the cause of your destruction. Or you can start, like, this becomes a journey for you to sort of move upwards towards that infinite bliss that you're wanting. Holding on to a particular worldly state, you think that that is going to be your infinite bliss, but it obviously is not. So that's the value of dejection. So chapter 1 is all about that. And by the end of chapter 2, what happens is Arjuna realizes that, all his knowledge so far, that he has been depressed and all of that stuff. And he doesn't want to fight the war because that will be a lot of sin, a lot of people will die, and what is going to happen, all of stuff. We'll read a little bit about that. So he comes to a point where he says, hey, Krishna, you know what? I'm confused. I surrender. Why don't you tell me what I should do? One of the Swami kind of akins this to, when we go to bed, we put our head down on the pillow. When we put our head down on the pillow, what we are really doing is, it's a sort of a surrender, right? We are not fighting. There's no logic going on. And we go into a state which is the sleep state, the deep sleep state. Deep sleep state, what is the quality of deep sleep? You don't have to worry about taxes. There's no bills that you have to worry about. There's no problems. There's no suffering. You're not seeking any more happiness. That's the happiest state. Now, the idea is that, can that state be made available to us when we are wakeful? Right? And so the way we got to that state on the pillow in the night was because we surrendered. So when you go from bodily needs, sensory needs, mind needs. Obviously, all of that can be solved by going out in the world. You come to this Anahat Chakra where, logic and rationality just falls apart. The worldly money and worldly attraction, none of that really matters. So that rationality, logic falling apart is as if you are now surrendering to the universe in a way, right? Now you can get completely dejected if you don't have somebody to talk to, or if you don't have the right understanding, you can go into depression. But this might be a way for you to graduate to the next level, right? That is the Anahat Chakra. So the past drops, you're not, future drops too, because all of our future thing depends on all of our past. So, but you just realize in this crisis situation that, gosh, like none of that is true. All this time that I relied on my spouse, it's just fallen apart. And my future is also kind of unknown at this point, meaning future drops. All my future plans are wiped away. This is the point where actually clarity can descend upon you in a way, if you are careful, right? If you take this as an opportunity. And now is the time when you are actually closer to the inner voice, because there's no other voice. You go talk to your friend, you go talk to the psychologist, you go talk to the therapist, you go talk to the doctor, anybody, right? You sort of feel like, wait a second, something is not right here. Like I need to analyze this for myself, like what this is. And you get into a state where now your voice calms down, your rationality, your logic calms down, meaning your deeper voice is going to start playing a role. Now, if you look at the 4 characters that are in this this whole thing, Arjuna. So let me share the screen at this point. So we have there are 4 people involved in this, right? There is a buildup of war. So it would be good to understand a little bit of how we get to this state, right, in chapter 1. So what has happened is that Arjuna, there are two clans basically. They're actually one clan. The family is Kaurava family, or Kuru family is what they call themselves in this Mahabharata epic. And many things have happened in the past. But just to summarize, 2 brothers, they have now come to end up fighting with each other. That one of the brothers is the Pandu, and he has 5 sons. Arjuna happens to be the middle one of the sons, and there's 2 older and 2 younger sons. And they are sort of like the good guys in this whole story. And they are the rightful people to get the throne of the kingdom, but they are constantly being pushed out by the older brother of Pandu. Now, why did the older brother not get the kingdom? Because he was blind, right? So he was born blind. So the father, their father decides that the kingdom should go to Pandu, who is the younger brother. So because Pandu was the king and then he dies, his sons were supposed to get the throne, but they don't get it. Because what happens is this brother, the blind king, takes the control of that thing. And then he is creating all kinds of problems for this family, the other family, pushing them away, exiling them, sending them outside the kingdom, and all of that stuff, right? So there's an interesting story that leads up to this. And the blind king also has a son whose name is Duryodhana, who's actually the main villain of this whole thing. And he is into a lot of bad, habits and bad things. And he has tricked people into, coming to this war, actually, because he wants to get rid of this Arjuna and his family on the other side. And this king, who is actually the older brother, who thinks he rightfully should get the throne, but because he was blind, he doesn't get it. He is holding on to the throne, right? So remember, we talked about how the tamasa, the bottom part, makes you immobile in a way, right? So you're stuck with that situation. So there is a bit of a bewilderment on his part, the blind king's part. And so the war, right before the war starts, he sends out these people, Sanjaya, the narrator of this whole Gita, who is, telling this thing to, so the narrator is telling it to the blind king, but on the battlefield, there is a conversation going on between Arjuna and Krishna, right? So those are the four characters. So what happens is that before the war starts, hopefully you guys are not spending your time reading this thing. Please follow along with the story here. So the blind king plays a trick. So what does he do? He knows that these five Pandavas are really good people. And he also knows that he wants to hold on to the throne and his son should get the throne, right? So what he does is he asks this narrator, Sanjaya, his name, to go talk to Pandavas. So this Sanjaya narrator is actually a good friend of Pandavas, and also good, obviously he's working for the king. So he goes there to tell the Pandavas, the message that this blind king has sent is, look, you guys are all such nice people, and you guys are such able-bodied people and all of that, and you should be able to build a new kingdom, leave this kingdom for us. And as you know, my son, the blind king says, through the charioteer, Sanjay, that, my son is a terrible person. He's not going to listen. You guys can understand the rationality that I'm trying to present here. And if you end up fighting the war, the sin is going to be upon you and upon us, all of us. A lot of people will die, women will be in trouble, and it'll be a lot of chaos. And our family and you individually will have to pay for all of that for generations, right? So that was the belief back then. And, probably to this day, Indians believe that, you pay for your karmas. So all of that is going on. And the five Pandavas are listening to Sanjaya. Now, this doesn't happen in the Gita itself. It is happening prior to Gita and prior to the war that will start. And they basically say, Pandavas say that the first two brothers say, no, we don't care. We don't care. We have to fight Duryodhana. The younger two kids, they say, we're going to follow whatever the older brother says. So the middle one is Arjuna. Now, the Arjuna situation is much like a lot of good people, right? Is that they're confused between the ethical questions here, right? Should I fight and kill this stuff? So at that point, he doesn't say anything, and the matter is washed off. And they decide Krishna is sort of speaking on behalf of Pandavas, and he tells the charioteer that, hey, look, go back and tell your king that we're going to fight the war. This war is going to happen. That's it. And so then the war starts. 10 days have passed. One of the characters is Bhishma. Bhishma happens to be the grandpa of Arjuna, right? And he loves Bhishma a lot. But it just so happens that Bhishma has chosen to fight alongside the blind king. So that is another one of the problems Arjuna has, is that, like, how can I kill my grandpa, who is my dearmost person, right? And then there is also a teacher on the other side, Duryodhana. There are some interesting stories that we could maybe cover at some future point in maybe we talk about Mahabharata. They really poignant stories there about how much this teacher loves Arjuna, and why Arjuna feels so morally, like, confused about, like, how am I going to fight the teacher? I love him so much. And a teacher is also fighting from the blind king's side. And so what happens is, Bhishma is supposed to be a demigod in a way, right? So it would be impossible to kill him, blah, blah, blah. So they are very happy, the blind king side of the people, that they are going to win the war. But with Krishna and Arjuna's trick and all that stuff, Bhishma actually falls down, right? He is about to die. That happens on 10th day. And now on the 10th day, blind king sits with he calls upon his charioteer, who is Sanjaya, the narrator. And he asks him, like, hey, what happened? What is going on the battlefield? Obviously, he's blind, right? He cannot see anything. Now, this blind symbolism is absolutely essential here, right? So this blind, not only was he physically blind, but from a philosophical sense or psychological sense, he was also blind, in the sense that he wanted to hold on to that throne and he couldn't see past his own greed. And to some extent, at different points in our lives, we fall in that category, right? And it so happens that the person who has written this epic, Mahabharata, he is also a character in the book. So he actually comes to Blind King and says, look, there's an epic war that is coming. Would you want to see the war yourself? I can actually give you sight. Now, a lot of this is metaphorical, obviously, right? I mean, so the Blind King says, no, I don't want the sight, because he knows that there's a lot of destruction that is going to happen, and he would much rather not see. And isn't that the situation for all of us in a way, right? There's wars happening beyond, in farther countries. We live in peaceful situations out here. And then we can actually sit and talk about philosophy. There's so much irony in this, right? So because of the situation of where we are politically and all of that stuff, we get to put these blinders on our eyes and live our lives as if nothing is going on, right? And to that extent, I think this character is important in this narrative here in Gita. The Sanjaya, on the other hand, the same author, or he's supposed to be a very knowledgeable person, and he has some magical powers, blah, 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 right? Obviously, he's the author of the whole book, but he's also a real character and all that stuff. Now, nobody knows how real that is, but we have to look at these things more as a moral of the story, right? So we have to peel off the layers of the magicalness in the story. So he asked Sanjaya, hey, look, you're going to be driving around the chariot for this king. I'm going to give you this so-called divine eyes, which means you can now look into the battlefield without even being there in the battlefield. So you can communicate with the blind king. Now, for the last 10 days, as the war was going on, every day, the king being the king, he's getting all the reports on the battlefield. But there's something that happens on 10th day where, Bhishma falls down, and now suddenly Blind King's side is become very, very weak. And so then he asks Sanjay, hey, can you tell me, what have you seen with your eyes, the divine eyes? What have you seen? Can you narrate that to me? And couple of things that will happen in that. We are going to, the whole chapter is like bunch of characters are being named and all of that stuff. A lot of those names make sense if you read the whole Mahabharata. So I'm not going to cover all of that. But there are two important elements that come across here. One of the things is that he says, look, on the first day, this happened. Your son, Duryodhana, approached the teacher the first time as people were gathered, and he started saying things So this son was actually jealous that teacher loved Arjuna a lot. Um, and he says to the teacher, yelling at him, saying, "Behold, thy intelligent disciple on the other side." Meaning he's doubting the teacher. Can you actually hurt Arjuna? You're going to fight this war on my side. So he is reminding him, look, you have your favorite disciple on the other side, but you're fighting this war on my side. And then he starts naming all these warriors on the other side too, who this teacher is familiar with, right? And he also makes a point to remind the teacher that you have been teacher your entire life. Even though you were teaching kids the skill of war, you've never really fought a war yourself. Or maybe you fought one or two wars here and there, but you're just a mere teacher. He actually in the verses, he calls him the Brahmana or the teacher, reminding him that this is actually a real battle. So are you ready, in a way, right? So he's being a bit arrogant to the teacher also. Um, then he looks at the grandpa, right, Bhishma. Now, everybody knows that Bhishma loves Arjuna a lot, and Pandava, and he has been a very ethical character in the whole story. But there's also like a deeper reason why he chooses to fight with Blind King against the good or good people, in a way, right? I mean, there's so many interesting sidebars in this whole journey of Mahabharata. It's just fun if you guys are interested in that sort of a thing. Um, um, so he sort of orders his people that, hey, make sure that you're guarding Bhishma. Now, there's two ways to look at it, right? He's a very prized possession in a way because he's a good warrior. And they knew that, if Bhishma would fight, then they will win the war. So he says, guard Bhishma, but he's also being a bit sarcastic because he's worried that he might run away on the other side, right? Because he loves those kids on the other side. Now, as this is going on, just to stop this rhetoric that is going on from Duryodhana, Bhishma blows his conch shell because, back in the battlefield back then, there would be conch shells that would be blown to, wake up the other side or wake up your own soldiers and all that stuff, right? And he also wanted to distract from the nonsense that was going on. And he was triggering, let's start the war. Let's start it. We're done with all this talking, he says. Now, during this time, while this is going on, what happens is on the other side, there is Arjuna, who is the hero of our whole story here. And Krishna happens to be his friend, childhood friend, also a cousin, brother. Now, Krishna sort of is presented as a godly character. Like, he has a lot of these interesting powers and he is very sensible, gives the right advice and all of that stuff, right? Throughout the whole Mahabharata epic. So in this particular war, Krishna sees that this is a war between two brothers. And he says that I'm not going to fight, but I'm going to be your charioteer. The way that happens is they are both Arjuna and Duryodhana are trying to seek help from different kingdoms. So Krishna himself is actually a king of another kingdom. So they go to his place and they see that Krishna is lying down on his bed and sleeping. So Duryodhana being Duryodhana, when he gets there first, he finds a chair that is near Krishna's head and he sits there. And Arjuna doesn't have any other place, but then he's also very respectful of him. He goes and sits near Krishna's feet on the bed. And then Krishna wakes up and he looks at Arjuna and he says, hey, what's up, Arjun? What's happening? And immediately Duryodhana jumps in. He says, hey, I'm here too. And I came here before Arjuna. So we both have come for the same reason. There's a war coming up and we need your help. And so he says, Krishna says, look, I agree that you came in the room first, maybe, but I saw Arjuna first, so I'm going to ask Arjuna, what does he want? Now, suddenly Duryodhana is like, oh my God, he's going to ask for the whole army. But Arjuna says, Krishna says that, look, there's choice between two things. One is you get to pick me or my whole army. So go ahead, Arjuna. What do you want? Do you want me or the whole army? So Arjuna says, I want you. And I don't want the army. So this again, the metaphor here is trying to explain about if Krishna is this reached soul in a way, when it comes, similar situation, not similar, but somewhat similar situations that arise for us when we are fighting battles in our lives, we, rather than trying to have this inner voice guide us, we tend to find more armies to fight the battles out there in the world, right? So eventually in that particular story, Duryodhana gets the whole army, and Krishna comes to Arjuna, and Krishna says that, look, I'm going to come with you, Arjuna, be careful. I'm not going to pick up any arms. So I'm going to be a charioteer. And, you guys fight the war. I'm not fighting the war. So that's how they come to this. And that itself has its own metaphorical existence, that story on how Duryodhana approaches this and Arjuna approaches this, right? So they are at a different level of spiritual path, if you will. We all are on a spiritual path in a way, right? And he asks Krishna to, on the battlefield, what happens is Arjuna says, hey, Krishna, can you drive the chariot in the middle of the battlefield? And I want to see who are these people, who is really wanting this war. And that is the side of evil on the other side. And I want to know who is part of that side of the evil. Now, Krishna being Krishna, and he's known to be a not-he god in a way, right? He's revered for that. He purposely takes the chariot and brings it right in front of the grandpa and teacher that Arjuna loves a lot. And he says these words to him, look, behold, these loved ones are the ones that you will be fighting with. So a lot of our issues, in life tend to be not with the others. If you really start peeling that layer, it really is the battle within, right? It's with our own people, or sometimes it is just with us, within us. And that's the value of this, the crisis situation that one faces. And the crisis here happens is that when Arjuna sees his grandpa and teacher on the other side, he just melts down. He says, like, look, this is craziness. Now, if the chariot was taken in front of Duryodhana, on the other hand, who he hates his guts, he would have not thought, even for a moment, there would not have been Gita at all, right? There wasn't any crisis. He would have chopped him in a moment there. But these loved ones who are fighting from the other side, he cannot bring himself to fight that war, right? So that is the build-up for this here. So Dhritarashtra says, on the field of Kurukshetra, the field of the working out of the Dharma, gathered together, eager for battle, what did they, O Sanjaya, my people, and the Pandavas, what happened in the last 10 days? How did Bhishma pass away? I mean, he's kind of bewildered, like he's confused, and like, why did this happen? I can't believe this, right? This is craziness. So that doesn't come across when you start reading the Gita by itself on this first line, right? You cannot get that whole background context, but it is important, right? Sanjaya said, then the prince Duryodhana, having seen the army of the Pandavas arrayed in battle order, approached his teacher. We talked about this. Behold, this mighty host of the sons of Pandu, O Acharya, means teacher, or Brahmana, right? He's reminding, this is kind of sarcastic, arrayed by Drupad's son, and he's like talking about a lot of other people. And that's your intelligent disciple. Remember him, Arjuna? And then he also tells everybody to guard Bhishma, and we talked about that. Arjuna says, and so there's a lot more verses here that kind of build up the war in a way. But we're going to skip over that. And then Arjuna said, Krishna, stay my chariot between the two armies so that I may view these myriads standing, longing for battle. Krishna stayed that best of chariots between the two armies in front of Bhishma and Drona and all the princes of the earth. Said, O Partha, behold, these Kurus, that's the clan, gathered together. He reminds him that you are also part of this family, Kuru, right? And those are your loved ones. Arjuna said, seeing these my own people, O Krishna, arrayed for battle, my limbs collapse. Nor do I see any good in slaying my own people in battle. Alas, we were engaged in committing a great sin, weren't we? Thank God I got this nice, thought that this is wrong and I will not fight, he says, right? And there's a lot more things he says here that I'm skipping, but it is interesting to read. He sort of reminisces or, all the things that Sanjaya goes to him through his blind king to convince him, remember, that look, you guys are good people. You shouldn't fight this war. My son is bad. Let him keep the throne. You guys are able-bodied. You can go do something else. And, you shouldn't kill your brothers and all of that stuff, right? So all of that conditioning comes to his mind right at that moment when he sees Bhishma and Drona. And he starts telling Krishna, look, this is going to be wrong, right? I shouldn't be killing my own family. What is the point of winning the war when I won't have my family to enjoy all the spoils of the war, so all of that stuff. This is important, right? When we are looking at a crisis situation, a lot of our thoughts or the thinking process is derived from the conditioning that we have received. And this is what we covered in last chapter as well, right? Chapter 14, is that this conditioning or the past memories of what we have heard becomes very crucial for you in that moment. Rather than looking at the situation at hand, you start digressing from it into some other pathway, which becomes unnecessary, and you are not able to resolve the situation in a very unbiased way. So that is something that is critical in chapter 1 to understand, right? When the crisis arrives at you, it is very hard for you to keep a fresh mind. But that is the time you want to keep the fresh mind. Now you go through, this has happened to me as well, right? A lot of psychotherapy and a lot of talking to friends, complaining about the other people that have caused this trouble for me and all of that stuff, right? All of that happens. After you get tired with all of that, you come to a point where you realize, nobody else is going to solve the problem. Everybody else is probably mocking me, probably realizing what a pitiful state I am in and all of that stuff, right? And you realize that, ultimately you need to resolve your own life situation. And that is where, you get to that anahat chakra, right? In a way, if you are careful. The Blessed Lord said, whence has come to thee this dejection, this stain and darkness of the soul in the hour of difficulty, right? This is the state. Again, one of the things that I said a long time ago in one of the lectures, that this conversation between Arjuna and Krishna, you might as well think about our own inner conversation. Sometimes we can be completely in depression and we can observe that depression, right? So remember what we talked about, like I can see this book. So the book is away from I. So I can see this depression. So meaning I am something different from this depression, right? So now there is a conversation that you can have with that I who is observing this depression, who is not depressed, right? So Krishna happens to be that person here between Arjuna and Krishna. Now, this whole Gita might as well have happened in Arjuna's head, might not even be Krishna, right? So it might just be Arjuna's, that's another way to look at the whole story. So it's as if Arjuna is telling himself, whence has come to thee this dejection? You are this great warrior. This kind of cowardice that you're talking about, this stain and darkness of the soul in the hour of difficulty and peril. There's a war that is going to happen, O Arjuna. This is not the way cherished by the Aryan man. The Aryan now has a very bad connotation, thanks to Germany, I guess. But Aryan back then really meant the warrior clan, right? This mood came not from heaven, nor can it lead to heaven. Okay. So this is coming from a really bad place. And on earth, it is the forfeiting of glory. You might win the war and you might save the kingdom, and people are rooting for you. People are fighting for your cause, and you are giving up. Here is a time for you to win some glory. And it is poorness of spirit that has smitten you away. So when a crisis comes to us, right, we can look at that as a situation for us to basically look at that as a glory that, if we win, much like that, wasn't there like a saying or a song also, that sticks and stones may break my bones, blah, 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 right? But, if you can survive that, you're going to feel so happy about this. And that's the glory, right? Um, so in this case, he's a warrior, right? It is poorness of spirit that has smitten away from me my true heroic nature, Arjuna says. My whole consciousness is bewildered. Bewildered is key word, right? There is that bewilderment that Dhritarashtra had, which was made him into a person who is going to stay stuck to his throne, right? He is worried that these Pandavas and Bhishma and everybody is trying to steal the throne away from him. And he is confused about that, and then he becomes more greedy. Now, in this case, what happens is he is bewildered also, Arjuna, but initially he wants that kingdom, but now he is talking about some higher goals. And he's saying, look, I want to be peaceful. I want to be nonviolent. And I want to just go to the woods and go to the mountaintop and forget about all of this stuff. In its view of right and wrong, I'm not able to see the right and wrong. I ask thee, which may be the better, that tell me decisively. I want you to make the decision for me. Isn't that the story of all of us in a way, right? So we go to the psychotherapy or any of these other places, you talk to the friends on something that has happened, and we are trying to confirm our choices through their voices, right? In a way, we say like, what if I did this? What if this and this? Or they might tell you, and you, because you respect this person or whatnot, you are driven by these others' suggestion, right? You want that other person to make the decision. I mean, there's a lot of other reasons why you might do that, is because if you fail, you can start blaming this person too, right? That can happen. And in today's culture where we are, we post all these pictures and all that stuff on Instagram, Facebook, all of that, we are trying to seek the validation from the other because we ourselves are very insecure, right? And that is sort of pointing to this whole thing where he is bewildered, doesn't know right from wrong, much like our situation in a way, right? And we want somebody else to decide for us. And I take refuge as a disciple with thee. This is that surrender part, right? So now there is a lot of conversation between these two lines, but I have chosen these two lines. And those are interesting in themselves. So the whole dejection or the crisis will turn off your logic, right? Right, wrong is logic. So the rationality turns down. Now it's like off. And you're as if now about to put your head down on the pillow. So here he says, I take a refuge. I'm going to be a disciple. Enlighten me, right? And there is a sort of not an enslavement aspect in this, but more of a surrender. There's really no better word in English for this, but there is a beautiful word in whoops. It's Sharnagati, right? Sharnagati is the word in Sanskrit for that, right? So I'm coming in Sharan of you, right? Or surrendering to you. Surrendering to you in the sense that I'm surrendering all of my rationality and logic in a way, right? I'm going to turn off my thought process. So that turning off the thought process is also what J. Krishnamurti was talking about. Like when you face a crisis, the biggest thing that you want to do is turn off your thinking process. Use the thinking for the right direction that you want to go into. But all the thoughts that are derived from your past memories is not going to help you at that point, right? So a lot more things happen between 1 and 2 here. And this by far is like the whole Gita. You talk to any Indian person, they will be able to recite this one phrase of one verse from Gita, which is karmane vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, right? So the point of that phrase is like, this is an essence of the whole, like, what is the advice that Krishna wants to give us, who are transacting in this world, right? Who have not become some recluse or somebody who has not gone to the mountain. So there's a very worldly sort of an advice that is given to us is, thou hast a right to action. We all have a right to action, meaning there is no such time in our entire life where we are not doing anything. We are always going to do something. Even if we go away into the mountains and become a recluse, we will be doing something, right? So we all have the right to action, but only to action, meaning what I'm going to do or my acting. And one thing that Krishnamurti says in this regard is that you are always acting, meaning you're always in the present, and understand the notion of action in the context of here and now, and don't let your past impose any biases on your action, right? So that's just a side note from Krishnamurti here. Only to action, never to its fruits, right? You cannot anticipate that you're going to win or lose. And remember here, this entire time, Arjuna is saying, I don't want to chop these other people. So what is it trying to show us? That he knows that he's going to win the war. So there is an ego there, and he's going to kill these other people, right? Now, maybe he himself is going to get chopped in the war. That is possible. But he doesn't have that humility because he has always won the wars. He's never seen failure in his entire life. And sometimes that also becomes a problem for us to understand rejection in a way, right? We live in the society, especially, here, Western part of the world, is that a lot of the life's comforts are given to us. And we are not used to hearing no in the truest sense, right? Versus you go to the poorest countries like Africa or some countries in Asia, right? So there's a lot of poverty there. And here there's an assumption that, oh, I will get that. If I do this, I have to get that. I have to get that too, right? So we almost seem to think that we have the right on the fruits. And it is the one of the side effects of affluent societies in a way, right? That is a disadvantage to what kind of action we end up doing, knowing that we are going to win this. When you know that you're going to win, the action is already corrupted in a way, right? That is the word that Krishnamurti uses, right? He calls that particular thing a corrupt action, no matter how ethical you are. It's a corrupt action because you already know that you're going to win. So corrupt, not in the sense that you're going to embezzle some money, which you might because you're affluent actually, but corrupt for yourself in the sense that you're not 100% on that action because you know that you're already going to win. So you are not 100% there, and you're not going to be doing the action if you had done it properly, right? Not in the same way. You don't have the rights on the fruit of the action. Let not the fruits of thy works be thy motive, right? So when I have been given the opportunity to act or called upon, that in itself should be enough for me to act, rather than like, if there was no calling upon done, I might be sitting and gossiping with somebody or feeling jealous about something or something else, blah, blah, blah. There's so many problems that we can get into. But if I'm called on to, like, here, Jason called me to present this. For these 2 hours, I'm not causing any trouble to anybody. maybe you guys, maybe I'm torturing you guys. But that's the point, right? I mean, when you're called upon doing the action, if you can express joy in that action without any worry about the act motive or the fruits, right? And so that's the thing, right? Action itself is key. That's the message. And don't worry about the fruits. And neither let there be in thee any attachment to inactivity. So this is by far another most important thing, is one of the things that settles into possibly affluent societies, or also people who are cynical about the world. They will want to just adopt inactivity. Some people become couch potatoes because they have enough money and they're not going to do anything in the society. Or on the poor side of the world, they might just go live off of begging or like doing something else, right? On the mountain. They just don't want to participate with any human interaction in a way, right? And that is something that Krishna says that is not good, right? Right to action, not on the fruits, and never inactivity, right? So that's by far the most important message for our society and for eons, right? I mean, since Gita has been written, that phrase is something that is used as the essence of everything in Gita for the humanity in a way. So the bewilderment that we talked about, right? Arjuna has this going on. There is a certain mental recording that has happened based on what was told to him at that earlier meeting. And then he feels love for those people. And then that brings back all of those past. And then, a wrong decision on his part was, I don't want to fight this war, even though he was supposed to be the leader on this side of the party. And that would have been terrible in a way. All right. So Krishna basically at that point really gets angry at Arjuna, right? And he says some very choice words in chapter 1 and chapter 2 to Arjuna, like calls him a coward, eunuch, all kinds of things, right? And in a way, two things happen there, right? So this anger is sort of like a shock to the system that Arjuna is going down, spiraling down. And it's sort of like a wake-up call. And then starts his questioning, right? Arjuna starts defending himself in a way, and then starts questioning all the different theories that Krishna is going to present over the next 18 chapters. So one of the key reasons that he gives as to why this kind of attachment happens and all of that, right? Or why suffering happens to humanity, right? These are the two elements: attachment towards something and dislike. So the Sanskrit words for those is raga and dvesha. So these are the two things, right? And then, like when that shock is given to his system, Arjuna starts asking interesting questions here, right? What are the signs of a stable-minded person, right? Or a meditative state? Now, meditative state that we think is meditation, which is, we sit in a silent room with essence, incense, perfume, and, om and all of that stuff. That's not, that comes across in entire Gita. And that is also something that Krishnamurti also says, nope, that's not meditation. Now, that is something that might bring you some calmness of those three bottom levels. Your body is calm, your senses are calm, and the mind is calm, but this is all coming from external things. Once those external elements are taken away, you're back to the noise. You're back, your mind is again fluttering in this world, right? And that is not a sign of a stable-minded person. Stable-minded person is stable all the time. No matter what happens in the world, you are reminding yourself that I need to be constant and approach this with attention, right? And then, Krishna goes into this whole thing about the duty in life or direction in life, right? So he talks about karma a little bit, right? We will cover that next time when we do the review. And then he talks about the importance of devotion. Now, the way I read Gita and what comes out as the notion of God is very interesting in the sense that, to this day, we have a certain understanding of God. And many people have become atheists. Same coin, two sides in a way, right? One says God is out there, other says it's not there. But there is a purpose for this devotion that we will cover in the third part of the review after we talk about karma, the duty. And then finally, knowledge, we have been talking about that 13, 14, 15 chapters, right? So one of the things that he mentions here as he goes down into chapter 2, the last phrase comes from chapter 2, number 47. He talks about yoga for the first time, right? And yoga, the way we understand, is the balance of body, and there's exercises and all that. But yoga, the literal meaning of yoga is meeting with the infinite or the God, if you will, right? So that meeting is yoga, right? And so he says that stable-minded person, fixed in yoga, do thy actions, having abandoned attachment, having become equal in failure and success, right? So no more biases, no more recordings in your mind. Your mind is stable, no matter if you fail or pass, right? For it is equality that is meant by yoga. So there are a lot of these like guidances in Gita about so many misconceptions about religion in general, or even misconceptions about Hinduism that are dispelled like way back. But we have lost this in the whole ritualistic tradition that has taken over that part of the continent in a way, and it is sweeping across, right? Works are far inferior to yoga of the intelligence. So now he's confusing Arjuna in a way, right? So he first says action is key, but then he also, as he's talking about yoga, he says works are far inferior to yoga of the intelligence. And yoga of the intelligence is the knowledge part, right? Once you understand, this is what we are covering in the last 6 chapters in a way. So he talks about this in chapter 2 itself. If chapter 2 was something that Arjuna would have clicked and everything would have happened, we would have never seen chapters from 3 to 18. So he is telling him that karma action is important, but it is inferior to the actual knowledge. Because karma is something that karma yoga that we will talk about a little bit later. It's again trying to control your ego in a way, but you still don't have the so-called wisdom. O Dhananjaya is the name for Arjuna. Desire rather refuge in the intelligence. So while you're working, try to find a refuge in your own knowledge of self. Poor and wretched souls are they who make the fruit of their works the object of their thoughts and activities. So in a sense, this is the summary of karma yoga that we'll cover more in detail next time. So here, people who are constantly greed oriented and all of that, they calls them poor and wretched, right? That seems to be a lot of us, right? In a way. And thoughts and activities, constantly we're thinking about that next big thing that we want to win. One whose intelligence has attained to unity casts away, even here in this world of dualities, both good doing and evil doing. So here he is pointing fingers at charity in a way, right? Or even people who are doing horrible things. So once you come to that equanimity state in your mind, that is the wisdom that he's talking about. It's very hard to get to that. And that's why he says karma yoga is easier. So he's talking about karma yoga, and then he's talking about jnana yoga in chapter 2. But then he elaborates on that in chapter 13 onwards to 18. Therefore, strive to be in yoga, meaning union with the infinity or union with that higher self or the inner voice. That is that strive to be in yoga, not join some yoga classes, which are fine, but that's not what it means here. Yoga is the skill in works, right? So this ability to look at your action with that sense of like, I'm not focused on the result, but I'm enjoying this action right now as I'm doing it. That's the skill. And, to be in this wisdom, sort of like the jnana, knowledge, you don't have to give anything up on this planet. You do everything, all the work, earn your money, fight the battles, all of that stuff, but use some skill. And that skill is what he expounds on karma yoga, right? And that in essence is the jnana yoga. But then the sages who have united their reason and will with the divine renounce, with the divine, right? Now the way to understand divine is sort of interesting. If you look at the context at that period of time, a lot of things were unknown, right? There was sun, moon, planets. Now obviously we know a lot of things, but still there are a lot of unknowns, right? So I feel like whenever somebody is talking about divine, they're talking about that unknown. There's something higher that this little me, do not understand. And I respect that, right? That's the way I think about it. But obviously, you can think about this as God, or some people revere Krishna or any other deities in India, right? That can also be considered as divine here. So he says, the sages who have united their reason and will with the divine, right? So this whole rationalization and what I am going to do, the will, they associate that with a higher power and not just me, right? So the ego is turned off. Renounce the fruit which action yields, and they are liberated. So ultimately, the whole thrust of Hinduism or Buddhism, all of these Asian philosophies in a way, is liberation. Liberation from this cycle of rebirth. And that theme will come many times in Gita. And the understanding of rebirth can be, okay, there's a life after I physically die, but I have a different interpretation of that, which is that every moment that we are living, from childhood until now, there are different points of time where crisis happens, and you feel like things have erased from your past, like none of that makes sense. And you enter this sort of a new life in a way, right? That's your rebirth. And in chapter 15, we are going to talk a lot more next week about this notion of rebirth. What kind of a life can you expect if you do believe in this, rebirth after death? But there is a equivalent way of understanding that in this life. What does rebirth mean for me from today to tomorrow when I am not physically dying? So liberated from the bondage of birth. So ultimately, the goal in Hinduism or Asian philosophies is that birth and this life and this world is a bondage. bondage, attachments, desires, all of that stuff. And we want to liberate ourselves. That liberation doesn't mean that you have to give up on all this stuff. That's not the point. It's transacting in this world, but not feeling attached. Love everything. That's the message, right? They reach the status beyond misery. Misery is because of this bondage. And this whole connection that he tries to make with, renounce the fruit and all of that stuff, that sort of kind of is a sense of bhakti yoga. This is the middle part of the Gita, chapter 7 to 12. When thy intelligence shall cross beyond the whirl of delusion, then shalt thou become indifferent to scripture heard, right? So all of the things that he was saying in chapter 1 and chapter 2, it's as if he has heard something from somewhere, scriptures and all of that, and he's just saying those words. And they most probably they don't even mean anything to him, to Arjuna. And isn't that our state in a way, right? I mean, we are supposedly good civil people, civil society. A lot of our civilization is based on effectively a fear of going to jail. If that jail element was removed or punishment was removed, I'm not sure if civil society would exist in this sense, right? That we know. So there is a certain book of rules that we follow, or if we believe in God, and even if we don't believe in God, I mean, there is certain conditioning that we pick up from the books, and we try to mimic that, right, in real life without really understanding the depths of what are we doing, right? Then shall thou become indifferent to scriptures heard, or that which thou hast yet to hear, right? So when you come to this wisdom, you're going to not just like read something and just latch onto it, right? Don't feel attached to it. Understand and internalize, like, what does it mean for me in this life, right? Who abandons all desires and lives and acts free from longing. And guess what? We all have been there. I've been there. Who has no I or mine, who has extinguished his individual ego in the one and lives in that unity, right? He attains to the greater peace. So Arjuna's approach is our typical approach, right? And then Krishna kind of brings him out of that and do the duty. And he says that I'm going to tell you all about bhakti yoga and knowledge. And Arjuna says, look, you've been telling me about knowledge, but then you also want me to fight the war. How is that same thing, right? That's not the same thing. And I'm actually giving you a peaceful solution. I'm just going to walk away from this war. Krishna says, no, 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 no. You're called upon this. That's something you need to stick with karma yoga, right? Do this action without any attachment to the results. And you're called upon this. And then there is a certain discussion that, he goes into, like, how to find one's own duty, right? So there is the real self that is called a Swarupa. And we have some innate tendencies and inner nature. That is what in Sanskrit they would call as Svabhava. And then there is the Swadharma, based on Swabhava, our inner tendencies, what we study and life guides us towards a certain duty towards society. And that also guides a lot of our ethics and morality and righteousness and all of that stuff, right? So in that sense, a lot of the civilized societies' ethics, morality, and righteousness is biased by effectively the tendencies of that person, right? So one person's ethics and morality and righteousness might be different from the other person who might be in some other industry, like might have other tendencies. So in that sense, this Swabhava and Swadharma is very much subjective to person. And so duty comes about based on that. unfortunately, fortunately, and we talked about this in chapter 14, there are these three gunas that are constantly interplaying: the sattva, the tamasa, rajasa, right? They're constantly interplaying in the world, but also within us. And so sometimes we feel very good, sometimes we feel lazy, sometimes we want to do a lot of stuff and we are greedy, we want to win something, right? So that is constantly happening within us. And we tend to stay within the profession that has come about because of our tendencies. And that is the guide to our what we are called upon on that particular moment, right? So he does say that, right? Don't neglect that, right? You're called upon doing this. That's your requirement. The society has put that on you. You be the warrior. You need to fight this war. And that will become your way to the spiritual life. Because he says that I want to be the nice person. I want to just be peaceful and leave from here. So he is kind of pointing fingers to how spiritual people look like externally. I mean, a lot of that happens, right? I mean, we look at Buddha, and Buddha sits in a certain way and his hairdo is done in a certain way. So we think that that whole external way of how he has sat is the way to meditate. So we try to mimic these external aesthetics that we tend to associate with that person's inner state. But that's not the case in reality, isn't it? So he says, do your actions, spirituality will come out of it. And um, um, and there will be chances for you to shine. That shining doesn't mean just winning $1 million or $1 billion, right? While that is okay, that shining is a way for you to ultimately purify yourself, right? Here he says in this war, it's a great opportunity for you, Arjuna. Here is the knowledge that you have learned, this karma yoga. You follow this, much like how samurais do, right? They tend to avoid having any kind of judgment about the other person when they are required to go out on the battlefield. Spiritualize your actions and the results, and to get to the real self. That is that stable-minded feeling, right? That is beyond the three gunas. We talked about that in the last chapter 14. So the goal that every action should be is, how can I connect to that infinity, right? That infinite space, that unknown, Swarupa, real self, Brahman, pure consciousness, whatever you want to call it, right? Pure consciousness in the sense that I'm a conscious being and I'm not muddled with jealousy, anger, fear, all of that stuff, right? The content of our consciousness is clear. That's what Krishnamurti would say. Any action that takes us away from Swarupa, right, from this thing, is sin or wrong action, right? Every action is okay. Fighting a war, killing somebody, all of that in this sense. As long as you are staying connected with your pure consciousness, there's no jealousy involved in it, no anger involved in it, right? So Arjuna said, if thou boldest the intelligence to be greater than works, O Janardana, why then dost thou, O Keshava, appoint me to do this terrible work of fighting these people? Blessed Lord said, in this world, twofold is the self-application of the soul. As I before said, O sinless one, we all are actually sinless, right? All these things that we do outside, I mean, that's the point of this whole Swarupa, Swadharma, and all of that stuff, right? We are called upon doing something, but when we can watch ourselves doing good or bad, the so-called good or bad, as the society wants to label, this I itself is sinless. That's the whole message here. So if we can connect with that, it will temper down our anger, our fear, our jealousy, and all. And we will find that, sort of ridiculous that we do that. So he calls him there's different adjectives that show up throughout this thing. It has a very interesting, like a metaphor in itself. Like, why does he call him sinless? And so here he's talking about twofold self-application of the soul, right? So good and bad, sin and virtue, and all of that stuff. So he says, look, you are sinless. That of the Sankhyas by the yoga of knowledge, that of the Yogins by the yoga of works. So yoga of knowledge is like instant spirituality in a way, right? You know it, that's it, done. That is Krishnamurti's way. And then there is the yogis, who there's a lot of efforts. And those efforts are necessary, but ultimately that last switch that happens is always instantaneous. But that purity that you expect of your consciousness, that is the yogic efforts, right? Um, he who controlling the senses by the mind, Arjuna, without attachment, engages with the organs of action in yoga of action, he excels. Therefore, without attachment, perform ever the work that is to be done. Thou shouldst do works regarding also the holding together of the peoples, right? So the whole society is counting on your specific action. That's how you need to approach the action. This whole this whole cloth of the society, right, is held by you in a way. Whatsoever the best do it, whatever your ability is, that the lower kind of man puts into practice. People are always looking up to you. That's how you need to be acting in this world. Not just Arjuna because he's the leader. We also, right? Obviously, we cannot advise other person, shouldn't. That's another message that comes across in Krishna. Don't give advice until somebody asks for the advice, right? Clean up your action. When your action is clean, people will look at that and they will feel inspired. The standard he creates, the people follow, right? That's the best way to live in this world, he says. He should not create a division of their understanding. When we are telling, like right now, as we are reading, one of the side effects of this whole Gita is that we might misunderstand that we understand. Or we might resist the understanding because we might have a certain understanding. So this line actually goes against the whole entire book, if you will, right? He should not create a division of their understanding, because before we looked at Gita, we had a different understanding of life, right? And Krishna is saying that we should not create any division by giving people unnecessary advice, which means some of you who are attending this and some of you who have vanished, there must be a reason. You're attending this because you find it interesting and you are seeking the advice in a way. In the ignorant who are attached to their works, he should set them to all actions. He in fact says that if somebody is doing whatever they are doing, it's fine, let them do it. Doing them himself with knowledge and in yoga. It is the modes which are acting and reacting. We saw this in chapter 14. So this he talks about it in chapter 2 earlier on each other, and is not caught in them by attachment. All the laziness, the greed, or the feeling of charity and all of that, don't get attached to any of that. That's just your nature. Sometimes you're going to be this, sometimes you're going to be bad, sometimes it's going to come and go. Happiness also will come and go and all of that, right? Don't feel too caught up in them. Better is one's own law of works, swadharma, though in itself faulty, it could be faulty, then an alien law. Somebody else comes and tells you that you might do this better, well wrought out. Death in one's own law of being is better. Perilous is it to follow an alien law. Okay, so time check, I guess. 3:45. We are almost there. I'm not going to talk about a lot of that. Maybe a little bit about this last section here. Arjuna said, but if there is no fault in following our nature, what is this in us that drives a man to sin, as if by force, even against his own struggling will? O Varshnaya, yeah. The Lord said, this is desire and its companion wrath, right? The senses, mind, and intellect are its seat. So we have brain, we have mind, and we have senses. What these three things do is they cause desire and wrath, attraction towards something or dislike. That's what these three things do, right? As a fire is covered with smoke, enveloped is knowledge by desire. So when that happens, when these things take over, we know something deep within, but that is completely enveloped by these desires and wrath. The senses, mind, and intellect are its seat, enveloping knowledge. By these, it bewilders the embodied soul. Therefore, O best of the Bharatas, Bharatas are, now they are trying to name India Bharat, right? Remember? So Bharata means a person who lives in India. But Bharat also apparently means, Bha means light, and one who is seated in light. That's what Bharat means, actually. Controlling first the senses, do thou slay this thing of sin, destructive of knowledge, right? This whole desire itself, attachment, is the biggest sin in order to live in the calm, clear, luminous truth of the spirit. Supreme, they say, beyond their objects are the senses. Supreme over the senses, the mind. Supreme over the mind, the intelligence. That which is supreme over the intelligent will is he. Now, he can be she here or no sex whatsoever, is the Purusha, right? When we said right at the beginning of the lecture that I see this book, this I is that Purusha, right? Within all of us. This I can see that I am enjoying watching something through my eyes. I can see this thought coming up in my mind. I can see that my brain is actually solving a puzzle. So all of these three things, senses, mind, intellect, I can see that. So it is not I, right? In a way, it's something outside of I. And that I is what we need to stay connected with. That's our inner voice. Thus awakening by the understandings to the highest, which is beyond even the discerning mind, putting force on the self by the self to make it firm. See, again, all of this is possible, even though we are saying mind is the problem. In fact, mind is the way that is going to help us get us out of this, right? So, think of it as self. This little self that we are, this conscious being, that is the one that is going to help us become the happier person, to make it firm and still. Slay thou, O mighty armed, this enemy in the form of desire, who is so hard to assail, right? So this is very, very difficult. It's easy. It seems so easy as we are reading this, and yes, but when we go about our ways in the world, the idea is that, can we be watchful? At times we can. Now that we have heard about it, maybe we can do a little more about it, but it is the most difficult thing to do, is what he says here, right? And that's sort of the end of it. I mean, in the next sections, we will talk about cleaning up the consciousness. That is the Karma Yoga. But next week, we'll talk about chapter 15. The following week, we'll talk about this Karma Yoga. And then 2 weeks later, what is this higher power? And Bhakti Yoga, devotion, what does that mean? And then there is the knowledge portion of it, right? So let's open the floor. Sorry it took so long. Are you guys still there?
Yeah.